The advertisement in the Sacramento Daily Union promised nothing more than honest work and a roof over her head. But Prudence Hartwell knew desperation when it stared back at her from the mirror each morning in the spring of 1872. She folded the newspaper carefully, her plump fingers trembling as she reread the words that might save her from becoming a burden to her already struggling sister's family. Rancher seeks wife for partnership in California territory. No romantic expectations, mutual respect required. Prudence was 32 years old, well past the age when most women married, and her figure had always been generous in ways that made the slim-waisted fashions of the day impossible to achieve. Her sister Margaret had married well enough to a shopkeeper in Sacramento, but with 4 children and another on the way, there was barely room for Prudence in the small quarters above the Mercantile. Every day she felt the weight of being unwanted, unnecessary, a spinster aunt who helped with the children but had no real place of her own in the world. She composed her response that very evening, her handwriting careful and neat, despite the anxiety that made her palms sweat against the paper. She was honest about her age, her appearance, her lack of prospects. If this rancher wanted a marriage of convenience, she would not deceive him about what he was getting. 2 weeks later, a reply arrived that changed everything. The letter was brief but not unkind. Caleb McKenna owned a cattle ranch 3 days' ride east of Sacramento, closer to the Nevada border where the land turned harsh and unforgiving. He needed a wife to help manage the household, to cook for the ranch hands during the busy seasons, and to provide the respectability that a single man lacked in the eyes of the territorial government when it came to land claims. He offered fair terms, her own money for personal expenses, respect for her privacy, and a genuine partnership in building the ranch into something prosperous. He made no promises of affection, but he also made no demands beyond the practical ones of managing a frontier household. Prudence accepted within a day of receiving the letter. The wedding took place on a hot May afternoon in a small church on the outskirts of Sacramento, with only Margaret and her husband as witnesses. Caleb McKenna arrived in town the morning of the ceremony, and Prudence got her first look at the man she was about to marry over a hasty breakfast at the hotel where he had taken a room. He was tall, perhaps 35 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting across long distances. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, but what struck Prudence most was the carefulness in how he spoke to her, as though he was measuring each word before letting it free. "I want you to know what you are getting into," he said after they had ordered their meal. "The ranch is isolated. We are 2 hours from the nearest town, which is barely more than a trading post and a saloon. The work is hard and the winters can be brutal. I have 3 men who work for me year-round, and we hire on extra hands during roundup and branding season. You would be the only woman for miles." Prudence met his eyes steadily, though her heart was racing. "I understand. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I have no illusions about frontier life being easy. What I want is a purpose, Mr. McKenna, a place where I am needed rather than tolerated." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the edges that made him look younger. "Then we will suit each other well, Miss Hartwell. I promise you will always be needed at the ranch, and I will do my best to make sure you never feel merely tolerated." They were married 3 hours later in a ceremony that took less than 15 minutes. Caleb placed a simple gold band on her finger, and the preacher pronounced them man and wife. When it came time to kiss, Caleb merely touched his lips to her forehead in a gesture that felt oddly gentle. Then they were in his wagon heading east, away from everything Prudence had ever known. The journey to the ranch took 3 days, just as Caleb had promised. They traveled through rolling foothills that gradually gave way to rougher country, where pine trees crowded the slopes and the air turned sharp and thin. At night, they camped under the stars, and Caleb was scrupulously respectful, setting up her bedroll on one side of the fire and his on the other. He asked her questions about her life in Sacramento, about her family, and listened with genuine attention when she answered. In turn, she learned that he had come west from Missouri after the war, that he had built the ranch from nothing over the past 8 years, and that he valued hard work and honesty above all else. "I will not lie to you, Prudence," he said on the second night as they sat by the fire after supper. He had started using her given name without asking permission, and she found she did not mind. "I proposed this arrangement because I am tired of being alone, but I also did not want to deceive some young girl into thinking I could offer her romance when I have forgotten how to feel such things. The war took a lot from me, more than just the years I spent fighting. I thought it would be more honest to find someone who wanted the same practical arrangement I did." Prudence poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into the darkness. "And yet you worried about deceiving a young girl but not a woman of my age," he smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "I thought a woman of your age would be wise enough to know her own mind and strong enough to speak it plainly. Was I wrong?" "No," she admitted. "You were not wrong. I appreciate your honesty, Caleb. I will be honest with you in return. I accepted your proposal because I was desperate, but I also hoped that perhaps we might build something worthwhile together, even without romance. I have never had a place that was truly mine, and I find that I want that more than I ever wanted love." He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then we want the same things. That is a better foundation than most marriages have." They reached the ranch on the afternoon of the 3rd day. It sat in a valley carved out by a fast-moving creek, with mountains rising on 3 sides and open grazing land stretching to the south. The house was larger than Prudence had expected, a sturdy log structure with a wide front porch and real glass windows. There was a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and several corrals where horses milled in the afternoon heat. Everything was well maintained but clearly built for function over beauty. 3 men emerged from the barn as the wagon pulled up. Caleb introduced them as Tom, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been with him since the beginning, Henry, younger and eager with a quick smile, and James, somewhere in between, quiet and watchful. They tipped their hats to Prudence with obvious curiosity, but their greetings were respectful. "The boss said he was bringing home a wife, but we did not quite believe him," Tom said with a gap-toothed grin. "Welcome to the ranch, Mrs. McKenna. It will be good to have a woman's touch around the place again." Caleb helped Prudence down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist despite the layers of fabric between them. She was acutely aware of her size, of how much of her there was to help down, but his expression showed nothing but courtesy. He led her into the house, carrying her single trunk as though it weighed nothing. The interior was sparse but clean. There was a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good iron stove, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. Caleb showed her to the larger bedroom, which was clearly his, and set her trunk down beside the bed. "I will move my things to the other room," he said. "This one has more space and the bed is better. I want you to be comfortable." Prudence felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had known this was a marriage of convenience, but the reality of separate bedrooms made it somehow more stark. "Thank you. That is very considerate." He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. "Prudence, I meant what I said about respect. This arrangement works only if we are both comfortable with the terms. If you ever feel otherwise, I want you to tell me." "I will," she promised, and meant it. That first week passed in a blur of learning. Prudence had always been a competent cook, but cooking for 4 men who worked from dawn until dusk was different from preparing meals for her sister's family. The men ate enormous amounts, and they appreciated good food with an enthusiasm that was both flattering and daunting. She learned where everything was stored, how to manage the large garden behind the house, and how to work the cream separator for the butter they made from the milk of the 2 cows Caleb kept for household use. Caleb was patient with her questions and surprisingly helpful in the kitchen for a man who ran a cattle ranch. He showed her how he liked his coffee made, strong enough to strip paint, and admitted that he had been doing his own cooking for so long that he had developed particular preferences. But he also made it clear that this was now her domain, and he would adapt to her way of doing things. "I hired you to be my wife and partner, not my servant," he said one evening as he helped her carry water from the creek for the washing. "If you need help, ask for it. Tom and the boys will not mind pitching in, and neither will I." As the days turned into weeks, Prudence found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she had expected. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, spent her mornings on household tasks, and used her afternoons to tend the garden and prepare supper. The men were unfailingly polite, and she began to learn their individual quirks and preferences. Tom liked his eggs fried hard. Henry would eat anything put in front of him with equal enthusiasm, and James had a sweet tooth that made him linger hopefully whenever she was baking. But it was Caleb who occupied most of her thoughts. He was a contradiction, this husband of hers. He was stern and commanding with his men, his voice carrying across the ranch when he gave orders, but with her he was gentle, almost tentative. He asked her opinion on matters concerning the household and listened when she suggested improvements. When she mentioned that the kitchen would benefit from better shelving, he built her an entire wall of shelves, carefully measuring and cutting the wood with a precision that spoke of genuine care. One evening in early June, Prudence was washing dishes after supper when Caleb came to stand beside her, drying the plates with a cloth as she handed them to him. It had become a comfortable routine between them, these quiet moments after the men had gone to the bunkhouse and the ranch settled into evening stillness. "You have done well here," he said suddenly. "Better than I expected, if I am honest. The men are happier, the house feels like a home, and I find myself looking forward to the end of the workday in a way I have not in years." Prudence felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I am glad I could make a difference. This place has become important to me more quickly than I would have thought possible. I feel useful here in a way I never did in Sacramento." He set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her fully. "You are more than useful, Prudence. You are essential. I want you to know that this arrangement has exceeded all my hopes." She met his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch, a warmth that went beyond mere satisfaction with a business arrangement. For a long moment, they stood there in the kitchen with the lamplight flickering around them, and Prudence felt something shift between them, something she had not dared to hope for. Then, Caleb cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. "I should check on the horses before dark." "Sleep well, Prudence." "You too, Caleb," she managed, her voice only slightly unsteady. After he left, she stood at the sink with her hands in the cooling dishwater and let herself acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was developing feelings for her husband, real feelings that went far beyond the practical partnership they had agreed upon. It was foolish and dangerous, because Caleb had been clear that he wanted only a marriage of convenience. But her heart, it seemed, had not read the terms of the agreement carefully enough. Summer deepened, and the ranch work intensified. Caleb and the men were gone for days at a time, checking on the cattle scattered across the grazing lands and moving them to better pasture. Prudence found herself lonely in their absence, which surprised her. She had always been comfortable with her own company, but now the house felt too empty when Caleb was not there. She caught herself listening for the sound of his voice, watching the horizon for signs of the riders returning. When they came back from one such trip in late June, Caleb looked exhausted, his face drawn with fatigue. Prudence had supper waiting, and she insisted he eat before doing anything else. The other men scarfed their food and headed to the bunkhouse, but Caleb lingered at the table, his shoulders slumped with weariness. "You need rest," Prudence said softly, coming to stand beside him. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his shoulder, a gesture of comfort. He looked up at her, and something in his expression made her heart race. "I missed this place while I was gone. I missed having someone to come home to. I did not expect that." "I missed you too," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. Caleb stood, and suddenly they were very close in the small kitchen. He raised one hand and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. "Prudence, I need to tell you something. This marriage of convenience we agreed upon, I find it is becoming inconvenient in ways I did not anticipate." "What do you mean?" she whispered, though part of her knew exactly what he meant. "I mean that I think about you constantly when I am away from the ranch. I find excuses to come back to the house during the day just to see you. I lie awake at night in that other bedroom and wish things were different between us." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I am falling in love with you, Prudence, and I did not plan for that. I do not even know if you could feel the same way about me." Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Oh, Caleb, I have been falling in love with you since the second week I was here. I was terrified to say anything because I thought you would feel I was breaking our agreement." He pulled her into his arms then, and she went willingly despite her self-consciousness about her size. But Caleb held her as though she was precious, his arms strong and sure around her. "You are beautiful," he murmured against her hair. "Do you know that? Every curve of you, every soft inch. I have wanted to hold you like this for so long." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Truly, you find me beautiful, truly," he said, and then he kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste peck he had given her on their wedding day. This was a kiss of passion and longing, of weeks of restraint finally breaking free. Prudence kissed him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I do not want to sleep in separate rooms anymore," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you as my wife in every way if you will have me." "Yes," Prudence said simply. "Yes to everything." That night their marriage of convenience became something real and true. Caleb was tender with her, patient and loving, showing her with actions as well as words how much he desired her. He traced every curve of her body with reverent hands, telling her she was perfect, that he had never wanted anyone the way he wanted her. Prudence had always felt ashamed of her plump figure, but under Caleb's gaze and touch, she felt desired and cherished in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the big bed, Caleb held her close and pressed kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, Prudence McKenna. I think I started falling for you that first morning when you looked me in the eye and told me you wanted a purpose. You have given me so much more than that. You have given me a reason to build something lasting here, a future worth fighting for." "I love you too," she whispered back. "You have given me a home and a place where I belong. I never thought I would find this kind of happiness." The days that followed were like a honeymoon, though they were still on the ranch with work to be done. But everything felt different now that they had acknowledged their love. Caleb found excuses to touch her as they worked together, a hand on her waist as he passed her in the kitchen, a kiss stolen when the men were not looking. At night, they shared the big bed and talked for hours in the darkness, learning everything about each other, building the foundation of their new life together. The ranch hands noticed the change, of course. Tom grinned knowingly but said nothing, while Henry and James simply seemed pleased that their boss was happy. The atmosphere around the ranch became lighter, as though everyone could feel the shift from a practical arrangement to genuine affection. In July, Prudence realized she might be pregnant. She waited another 2 weeks to be certain before she told Caleb, afraid of disappointing him if she was wrong. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second month in a row and the morning sickness began, she knew. She told him one evening on the porch as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Caleb, I have news. I believe I am going to have a baby." He went very still beside her, and for a horrible moment she feared he was unhappy. Then he turned to her with tears streaming down his weathered face, and she realized he was crying from joy. "A baby. Truly, truly," she confirmed, her own tears starting. "Are you pleased?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that took her breath away. "Pleased does not begin to cover what I feel. You have given me so much, Prudence. A home, love, and now a child. I am the most fortunate man in California." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Caleb became almost comically protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy and worrying whenever she looked the slightest bit tired. Prudence found it endearing even when it became annoying, because she knew it came from a place of deep love. Tom and the other men were equally solicitous, and she found herself being fussed over by 4 grown men who acted as though she might break at any moment. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one afternoon when Caleb tried to stop her from carrying a basket of vegetables in from the garden. "Women have been doing this work for centuries while carrying babies." "Not my wife," he said stubbornly. "Not when I am here to help." She kissed him to stop his worrying, and that led to them sneaking away to the bedroom in the middle of the afternoon, something that would have scandalized her a year ago but now seemed perfectly natural and wonderful. In August, a complication arose that threatened their happiness. A man named Victor Hastings arrived at the ranch with papers claiming that Caleb's land grant was invalid due to an error in the surveying. Hastings owned the neighboring property to the south and had apparently been trying to expand his holdings by challenging the claims of smaller ranchers. He was a large man with cold eyes and an attitude that immediately set Prudence's teeth on edge. "You have until the end of September to vacate the property," Hastings said, standing in their front yard while Caleb read through the legal documents with a face like stone. "I have already filed the proper paperwork with the territorial office. This land will be mine." "This land is legally mine," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. "I have the original grant and I have been improving and working this property for 8 years. You cannot just take it." Hastings smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "The law says I can when your claim is based on faulty surveying. Take it up with the territorial office if you want, but I think you will find they are very interested in correcting these errors. Good day, McKenna." After he left, Caleb stood staring at the papers in his hand, his whole body rigid with fury and fear. Prudence came to him and took his hand, squeezing gently. "We will fight this. There must be something we can do." "I built this place from nothing," Caleb said, his voice shaking. "Every board in this house, every fence post, every head of cattle. I cannot lose it, Prudence. This is our home. This is where our child will grow up. "And you will not lose it," she said firmly. "We will go to Sacramento if necessary, we will hire a lawyer, we will do whatever it takes. But we will not give up our home without a fight." Over the next few weeks, Caleb made several trips to the territorial office, trying to sort out the situation. Each time he returned more frustrated and worried. The surveyors were claiming that the original landmarks used to establish his boundary were wrong, and without a proper survey, his claim was in question. A new survey would cost money they did not have readily available, and even then, there was no guarantee it would resolve the issue in their favor. Prudence watched her husband grow more haggard with worry, and she felt helpless in a way she hated. She was nearly 6 months pregnant now, her belly round and obvious, and she could not ride with him or help him fight this battle in any practical way. But she could offer comfort and support, and she made sure he knew he was not alone in this struggle. One evening in September, as they sat at the kitchen table going over their finances for the 100th time, trying to find money for legal help, Tom knocked on the door. He came in looking uncomfortable, his hat in his hands. "Boss, I have been thinking about this situation with Hastings," he said. "I worked for him for a few months before I came to you, and I know some things about how he operates. He has done this before, challenged other men's claims using this same surveyor he has in his pocket. He bribes the territorial officials to look the other way while he swallows up the smaller ranches." Caleb looked up sharply. "Can you prove that?" "Maybe," Tom said slowly. "I know a couple of the men who worked those other ranches before Hastings took them over. They might be willing to talk, especially if it means stopping him from doing it again. But it would take time to track them down, and you would need a lawyer willing to take on a case against a man as powerful as Hastings." Prudence felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. "Then we find those men and we find that lawyer. How much time do we have?" 3 weeks before the deadline Hastings gave us," Caleb said. "But that is not the real deadline. The real deadline is when he gets the territorial office to invalidate my claim officially, which could happen any day." "Then we move fast," Prudence said decisively. She looked at Tom. "Can you start trying to find those men? Caleb, you need to go to Sacramento and find a lawyer who is honest and brave enough to take this on. I will manage the ranch while you are gone." "Prudence, you are 6 months pregnant," Caleb protested. "I cannot leave you alone here." "I will not be alone. Henry and James will be here, and I am perfectly capable of managing for a few days." She took his hand and held it firmly. "This is our future, Caleb, our child's future. We have to fight for it with everything we have." He looked at her with such love and admiration that it took her breath away. "Have I told you lately that you are the strongest woman I have ever known? You could stand to mention it more often," she said with a small smile. "Now go. Time is not on our side." Caleb left for Sacramento the next morning, and Tom rode out to start tracking down the former ranch workers who might have information about Hastings' corruption. That left Prudence with Henry and James to manage the daily operations of the ranch. She had learned a lot in the months she had been there, but she had never been solely responsible before, and she felt the weight of it. The first day went smoothly enough. She managed the morning chores, prepared meals for Henry and James, and even helped James repair a section of fence near the creek. But that night, as she lay alone in the big bed she shared with Caleb, she felt the baby kick strongly and was overwhelmed by a sudden fear. What if they lost the ranch? What if she had to raise her child without the security and home she had finally found? She pressed her hands to her belly and whispered, "I will not let that happen, little one. Your father and I will fight for you for this place. You will grow up here knowing you are loved and safe." The next 2 days passed in a blur of work and worry. Henry and James did their best to keep things running smoothly, but they were used to having Caleb there to make the decisions. Prudence found herself stepping into that role, making choices about which pasture to move cattle to, how to handle a horse with a thrown shoe, when to ride out to check on the water sources. It was exhausting and terrifying and strangely exhilarating all at once. On the third day, riders appeared on the horizon. Prudence felt her heart leap into her throat, fearing it was Hastings coming to cause more trouble. But as they drew closer, she recognized Tom returning, and he had 2 other men with him. She went out to meet them, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Tom made introductions. The 2 men were indeed former ranch workers who had lost their land to Hastings through the same questionable surveying claims. They were willing to testify if it came to that, and they had some documentation of their own that might help prove a pattern of fraud. "This is good," Prudence said, feeling hope rise again. "This could make all the difference. Caleb should be back from Sacramento tomorrow or the next day. If he found a lawyer willing to take the case, we might actually have a chance." Caleb returned the following evening, and Prudence nearly wept with relief when she saw him riding up to the house. She ran out to meet him, as fast as her pregnant body would allow, and he swept her into his arms the moment he dismounted. "I found someone," he said, holding her close. "A lawyer named Marcus Stone who has been trying to build a case against Hastings for years, but never had enough evidence. When I told him what Tom suspected, and that we might have witnesses, he agreed to take us on. He is filing an injunction to stop the territorial office from processing Hastings' claim until we can present our case." "Thank God," Prudence breathed. "Tom is here with 2 men who lost their ranches to Hastings the same way. They have papers, Caleb. Evidence." His eyes lit up with fierce hope. "Then we have a real chance." Stone said if we could prove a pattern of corruption, the territorial government would have to investigate, and Hastings' whole scheme could collapse. The next 2 weeks were a frenzy of activity. Marcus Stone came to the ranch to interview Tom and the other men, gathering all the documentation they had. He was a sharp-eyed young man with a passion for justice that reminded Prudence of why she had fallen in love with Caleb in the first place. Both men refused to back down from a fight when they believed they were in the right. The case went before a territorial magistrate in early October. Caleb wanted Prudence to stay at the ranch given how advanced her pregnancy was, but she refused. "This is my home too," she said firmly. "I am going to be there to fight for it." So they traveled together to the small town where the hearing was being held, a journey that took most of a day and left Prudence exhausted and aching. But she sat in that courtroom beside her husband, her hand in his, and watched as Marcus Stone methodically dismantled Hastings' case. Tom and the other men testified about the pattern of fraud, about the surveyor who appeared to be working for Hastings, about the territorial officials who looked the other way. Stone presented documentation showing that the same surveyor had been involved in every case where Hastings had expanded his holdings, and that in several instances, the supposedly faulty original surveys had been perfectly accurate. The evidence of corruption was overwhelming. By the end of the second day of testimony, even Hastings' own lawyer looked uncomfortable. The magistrate took only an hour to deliberate before ruling that Caleb's original claim was valid, that the survey challenging it was fraudulent, and that there would be a full investigation into Hastings' land acquisition practices. Caleb and Prudence walked out of that courtroom with their future secured. He lifted her off her feet despite her size and pregnancy, spinning her around with a whoop of joy that made everyone in the street turn and stare. "We won," he said, setting her down and cupping her face in his hands. "We get to keep our home. Our child will grow up on the ranch." "I never doubted it," Prudence lied and kissed him. They returned to the ranch to find Tom and the others had prepared a celebration. There was food and music, and the men danced with each other in the absence of other partners, their joy at the victory making them silly and carefree. Caleb danced with Prudence slowly and carefully, mindful of her condition, his eyes never leaving her face. "I could not have done this without you," he said softly. "Your strength, your refusal to give up, your belief that we could win. You are my partner in every way that matters, Prudence. I love you more than I have words to express." "I love you too," she said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Always." The baby arrived 3 weeks later on a cold November morning. Prudence's labor started just before dawn, and Caleb sent Henry racing to the nearest town to fetch the midwife while he stayed with her, holding her hand and trying not to panic. The midwife arrived in time, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had been delivering babies on the frontier for 20 years. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caleb feared he might lose both his wife and child. But Prudence was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and as the sun began to set on that November day, she brought their son into the world with a final, triumphant push. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." Caleb took his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect human he and Prudence had created. He carried the baby to where Prudence lay exhausted against the pillows and placed their son in her arms. "Look what we made," he whispered. "Look at him, Prudence. He is perfect." Prudence gazed down at her son, at his dark hair and red, wrinkled face, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "Welcome to the world, welcome home." They named him Samuel, after Caleb's father who had died years before, and he became the center of their world. Caleb was a devoted father, taking time away from the ranch work to help with the baby, walking the floor with Samuel when he cried at night so Prudence could rest. He changed diapers without complaint and sang off-key lullabies, and Prudence fell even more in love with him watching him with their son. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow that blanketed the valley in white. The ranch work slowed during these months, and they spent long evenings by the fire as a family. Caleb would hold Samuel, while Prudence read aloud from books they ordered from Sacramento, or they would simply sit together in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep and marveling at the life they had built. "A year ago I was alone in this house, wondering if I would always be alone," Caleb said one evening in December as snow fell softly outside the windows. "Now I have you and Samuel, and I feel like the wealthiest man alive. How did I get so lucky?" "I was the lucky one," Prudence countered. "I thought I would live my whole life feeling unnecessary and unwanted. Then I found a rancher who needed a wife, and it turned out he needed me specifically, though neither of us knew it at the time." He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I did not just need you, Prudence. I needed your strength, your kindness, your refusal to be anything less than yourself. You changed everything for me. You taught me how to feel again, how to hope, how to love. You did the same for me," she said softly. "You made me feel beautiful and worthy and necessary. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You claimed my soul, Caleb, and I gave it to you gladly." Spring came again, bringing new life to the ranch. The cattle that had survived the winter were moved to fresh pasture, and Caleb hired on 2 additional hands to help with the expanding operation. The victory over Hastings had given them breathing room, and with the land secure, they could plan for the future with confidence. Prudence settled into motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else. But there was also a deep tenderness in how she cared for Samuel that sometimes brought tears to Caleb's eyes. He would come in from a long day of work to find her nursing their son while she talked to him about her day, her voice soft and loving. Or he would wake in the night to hear her singing lullabies, soothing Samuel back to sleep with infinite patience. As Samuel grew from a newborn into an infant who smiled and cooed, the ranch prospered. The cattle multiplied, the garden produced abundantly, and Caleb was able to add more improvements to the property. He built an addition onto the house, creating a proper nursery for Samuel and planning for the other children he hoped they would have. He dug a new well closer to the house so Prudence would not have to carry water so far, and he constructed a root cellar for storing food through the winter. In May, a letter arrived from Sacramento that brought unexpected news. Hastings had been arrested on charges of fraud and corruption, and his entire land empire was being dissolved. Several ranches that had been taken through his schemes were being returned to their original owners or their heirs. Marcus Stone wrote that he hoped to see justice fully served, and that Caleb's courage in standing up to Hastings had made it all possible. "You started something important," Prudence said as they sat on the porch reading the letter together, while Samuel napped nearby in his cradle. "You protected not just our home but other people's homes too. You should be proud." "We should be proud," Caleb corrected. "You were the one who insisted we fight instead of giving up. You were the one who kept me going when I wanted to despair." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the valley spread out before them, green and beautiful in the spring sunshine. This was their land, their home, their future. They had fought for it and won, and now they would build something lasting here. That summer was one of the happiest times of Prudence's life. Samuel was walking now, toddling around the house and the yard with more energy than seemed possible for such a small person. Caleb doted on him shamelessly, carrying him everywhere and teaching him about the ranch animals with an enthusiasm that made Prudence smile. Tom and the other men were equally charmed, and Samuel had no shortage of attention from the ranch hands who competed to make him laugh. In August, Prudence realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise but no less joyful. Caleb held her close when she told him, his hand already moving to rest protectively on her still flat stomach. "Another child," he said wonderingly. "Our family keeps growing, Prudence. I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I," she admitted. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that this is real, that I am not going to wake up back in Sacramento in my sister's cramped quarters, still a spinster with no prospects." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "This is real. You are mine, I am yours, and we are building a life together that is more than either of us dreamed possible. I love you, Prudence McKenna. I love you too, Caleb, with everything I am." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Prudence knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was more confident in her role as wife and mother. She continued to manage the household with her usual efficiency, though Caleb and the men insisted on doing more of the heavy work. Samuel kept her busy chasing after him, and she found that caring for a toddler while pregnant required reserves of energy she had not known she possessed. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, arrived on a warm April evening in 1874. The birth was shorter and less difficult than Samuel's had been, and when Mrs. Chen placed the tiny girl in Prudence's arms, she felt her heart expand once more to accommodate this new love. Caleb cried when he held his daughter for the first time, his large, work-roughened hands cradling her with exquisite gentleness. "She is beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother. She has your eyes," Prudence observed, noting the baby's gray-blue gaze. "And I think she is going to have your stubborn chin." He laughed at that, the sound full of joy and wonder. "Then she will fit right in with this family. We are all stubborn here." Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly and bring her his toys. Prudence and Caleb took turns managing the children and the work, supporting each other through the exhaustion and challenges of raising a family on the frontier. Some days were hard, when Samuel had a tantrum or Rose would not stop crying, when the work seemed endless and the isolation felt heavy. But those days were far outnumbered by the good ones, the days full of laughter and love and small triumphs. Tom announced in the summer of 1874 that he was planning to retire and return to his family back east. It was bittersweet news, as he had been with Caleb since the beginning, but they understood his desire to spend his final years with his children and grandchildren. Before he left, he pulled Caleb aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know something, boss," Tom said gruffly. "When I first came to work for you, this place was just a dream you were chasing. But you have made it real, and a lot of that is because of the woman you married. She is the heart of this ranch, the reason it feels like a home instead of just a workplace. You did good when you brought her here, even if you both thought it was just a practical arrangement at the time." Caleb shook his hand, moved by the older man's words. "I know. She saved me in more ways than I can count. I will never stop being grateful that she answered that advertisement." After Tom left, they promoted James to foreman. He had grown into the role over the years, proving himself capable and trustworthy. With James managing the day-to-day operations, Caleb had more time to spend with his family and to focus on expanding the ranch's holdings and improving the stock. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved the ranch and spent every moment he could following his father around, learning how to work cattle and care for horses. Rose was sunny and sweet-natured, the darling of everyone on the ranch, with a laugh that could lighten even the hardest day. In 1876, Prudence gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Tom, the man who had been instrumental in saving their ranch. And in 1878, their youngest child arrived, another daughter they named Margaret after Prudence's sister. Their family was complete, 4 children who filled the house with noise and life and love. The ranch prospered beyond their early dreams. Caleb was able to acquire additional land legally this time, expanding their grazing territory and increasing their herd. They were one of the most successful ranches in the region, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. Prudence managed the household and the finances with skill, and together she and Caleb made decisions about the ranch's future as equal partners. But more than the material success, what Prudence treasured most was the love that bound their family together. Every evening they gathered around the dinner table, all 6 of them, and shared the events of their day. Caleb would tell stories about the ranch work. Samuel would report on his progress learning to rope cattle. Rose would chatter about the wildflowers she had found, and the younger children would contribute their own excited babble. Prudence would watch them all, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for this life she had been given. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch as a family, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Caleb would hold Prudence's hand, their fingers intertwined as naturally as breathing, while the children played in the yard. These were the moments Prudence knew she would treasure forever, the simple peace of being surrounded by the people she loved most in the world. One evening in the late summer of 1879, after the children had been put to bed, Caleb pulled Prudence into his arms on the porch where they had spent so many quiet moments together over the years. "You remember the first time we stood here?" he asked, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "You had been here less than a week, and I was trying so hard to maintain the fiction that this was just a business arrangement, that I felt nothing beyond gratitude for your help with the household." Prudence smiled against his chest. "I remember. I was already half in love with you then, though I would not admit it even to myself. I thought I had to protect my heart because you had made it clear you wanted nothing more than a partnership." "I was a fool," he said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I wasted weeks pretending I did not care when the truth was I started falling in love with you the moment you looked me in the eye over breakfast in Sacramento and told me you wanted a purpose. You were so brave, so honest, so completely yourself. How could I not love you?" "You claimed my soul," Prudence said softly, echoing words she had spoken years before. "Fiercely and completely, even when I thought my heart would never be wanted. You taught me that I was worthy of love, that my body and my spirit were enough exactly as they were. You gave me everything I never dared to dream of." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the love and passion and partnership of their years together. When they broke apart, they stayed wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the ranch they had built together. "I answered an advertisement for a marriage of convenience," Prudence said. "I never expected to find this. True love, a real partnership, a family, a home. You gave me all of it, Caleb." "We gave it to each other," he corrected. "Every day we choose to build this life together, to love each other through the hard times and the good. That is what makes it real, Prudence. Not the piece of paper we signed in Sacramento, but the choice we make every single day to be partners in every sense of the word." She turned to fully face him, rising on her toes to kiss him again. "Then I choose you, Caleb McKenna, today and every day for the rest of our lives. I choose this love, this family, this life we have built together. And I choose you," he whispered against her lips. "Always you, my beautiful, strong, amazing wife. The plump spinster who answered my advertisement and became the love of my life." She laughed at that, the description that had once caused her such pain now a fond joke between them. "I am not so plump anymore after 4 children." "You are perfect," he said firmly. "Every inch of you, every year we have together, every moment of this life, perfect because you are mine and I am yours." They stayed on that porch long into the night, talking and dreaming about the future. Samuel would take over the ranch someday, they agreed, but only if he wanted it. Their children would have choices, opportunities to make their own paths in life. The ranch would be their legacy, but more than that, the love they were building into this family would be what truly lasted. In the years that followed, their life continued in the patterns they had established. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Caleb and Prudence grew old together with the same fierce love that had transformed their marriage of convenience into something beautiful and true. Samuel did indeed take over the ranch when he was old enough, but he worked alongside his father for years first, learning not just the practical skills of ranching but the deeper lessons of partnership and respect that Caleb had learned from Prudence. Rose married a young lawyer from Sacramento and brought her husband to live on a section of the ranch land, where they built their own home and raised their own family close by. Thomas became a horse breeder, developing a reputation throughout California for the quality of his stock. And Margaret, the youngest, surprised them all by becoming a teacher, opening a school on the ranch for the children of the workers and the neighboring families. Through it all, Prudence and Caleb remained the heart of the family, their love a constant example to their children and grandchildren. They still sat on that porch every evening when weather allowed, holding hands and watching the sun set over the valley they had fought to keep. Their hair turned gray, their faces lined with the years, but the way they looked at each other never changed. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration that brought together people from all over the region. Marcus Stone came from Sacramento, now a respected judge, and several of the ranchers whose land had been restored after Hastings' fall came to thank Caleb and Prudence once again for their courage in standing up to corruption. The party lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared around bonfires in the yard. But at one point, Caleb pulled Prudence away from the celebration, leading her down to the creek where they had walked so many times over the years. The moon was full overhead, painting everything in silver light. 25 years ago, I placed an advertisement in a newspaper asking for a wife, Caleb said, taking both her hands in his. I thought I was looking for someone to cook and clean and help me maintain my land claim. I thought I had my heart so carefully guarded that no one could ever reach it again. And instead you found me, Prudence said, smiling up at him. The plump spinster who needed a home as much as you needed a wife. I found everything, he corrected. I found my partner, my love, my reason for every single thing I do. I found the other half of my soul, Prudence. These 25 years have been the greatest gift of my life. Tears streamed down her face as she pulled him close. You claimed my soul fiercely from the very beginning, even when neither of us knew it. And I gave it to you gladly, Caleb. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you. They kissed there by the creek under the moonlight, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from what had started as a simple business arrangement. The sounds of celebration drifted down from the house, their children and grandchildren and friends rejoicing in the love story that had become the foundation of so much happiness. When they finally returned to the party, hand in hand as always, Samuel stood and raised his glass in a toast. To my parents, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, who taught us all that love is not about perfect circumstances or ideal situations. It is about choosing each other every single day, working as partners, and building something lasting together. Thank you for showing us how it is done. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and Prudence felt Caleb's arm tighten around her waist. She leaned into him, this man who had given her everything, who had seen worth in her when she could not see it in herself, who had loved her fiercely and completely for 25 years. Happy anniversary, my love, he whispered in her ear. Happy anniversary, she whispered back. Here is to 25 more. They both knew that 25 more years was unlikely given their ages, but the sentiment was what mattered. They would love each other for however much time they had left, cherishing each day as the gift it was. In the end, they were given another 15 years together. Good years, full of the joys of watching their grandchildren grow and their children thrive. They saw the ranch continue to prosper under Samuel's management, watched Rose and her husband build a successful law practice, celebrated Thomas's horses winning competitions throughout the state, and took pride in Margaret's school becoming a model for rural education. When Caleb finally passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Prudence grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been given 39 years together, 39 years of love and partnership and shared purpose. He had claimed her soul, and she had given it gladly, and in return, he had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. She lived another 3 years after his death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren on the ranch they had built together. She spent her final days on that porch she had loved so much, looking out over the valley and remembering the man who had answered her letter all those years ago. the man who had promised her respect and partnership and given her so much more. When Prudence died quietly one summer evening with all her children present, they buried her next to Caleb on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone they placed there told the simple story of their lives. Caleb and Prudence McKenna, partners in life and love, founders of the McKenna Ranch. But the real legacy they left was not carved in stone. It lived in the generations that followed, in the love and respect that became the foundation of the entire family, in the ranch that continued to thrive for decades more. Samuel told the story of how his parents met to his children, and they told it to theirs. The tale of the plump spinster who answered an advertisement for a marriage of convenience and found true love with the rancher who fiercely claimed her soul. It became a family legend, proof that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that what started as a practical arrangement could become something beautiful and lasting if both people were willing to be honest and brave and open to the possibility of more. The story of Caleb and Prudence inspired generations of their descendants to believe in love, to work as partners, and to build their own lasting legacies. And on quiet evenings, when the family gathered on that same porch that Caleb and Prudence had loved, they could almost feel the presence of those two people who had started it all. The rancher and the spinster who had found each other across the pages of a newspaper advertisement, who had built a life and a love that transcended the practical arrangement they had initially agreed upon, who had proven that real love comes not from perfect circumstances, but from two people choosing each other every single day. Their love story became the bedrock upon which everything else was built, a testament to the power of taking chances, of being brave enough to hope, and of opening your heart even when you think it has been closed forever. Caleb had claimed Prudence's soul fiercely, and she had given it to him gladly, and together they had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. In the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to everyone who came after them. Proof that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that you are never too old or too imperfect to find your person, and that a marriage of convenience can become the greatest love story ever told if both people are willing to let their hearts be claimed. The McKenna Ranch continued for generations, but it was always known as the place where a plump spinster and a lonely rancher found each other and built something lasting from an arrangement that was supposed to be merely practical. Their story was told and retold, inspiring others to believe in the possibility of love even when circumstances seemed to dictate otherwise. And if you visit that valley today, you can still see the ranch, though it has changed much over the years. But if you climb the hill where Caleb and Prudence are buried and look out over the land they fought to keep, you can feel the echo of their love, as fierce and true today as it was over 100 years ago when a woman answered an advertisement, and a man claimed her soul, and together they built a love story for the ages.